All right, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for your flexibility today in meeting me at a little bit later time than what we'd originally expected. I'm really excited to talk about my new book, Astrological Mavericks. Do you have what it takes to change the world? Just got to print it. It's available on Amazon and through your local bookstore, as well as in Apple eBooks. And as I go through this, please feel free to ask questions as you need. I really appreciate input and questions. I also really want to work on talking slower because I tend to talk a little bit too fast. So please feel free to interject if I'm going too fast. Let's see. Okay, so what is a maverick? When we look up maverick in the internet, we find that some of the definitions include an unorthodox or an independent-minded person, the unbranded range animal, especially a calf that has become separated from its mother, and it's traditionally considered the property of the first person who brands it. So, you know, if a calf was to be born out in the hills somewhere, and someone was to come across that calf, they'd be able to claim it. It's not like you can hit that button. And this is my favorite from a story by Gordon R. Dixon entitled Maverick. It's a word meaning someone without the ownership mark all his herd fellows wear burned into their hides. Every society has a few mavericks. You can tell us by our distinguishing marks if you know what to look for. For one thing, we refuse to live by the herd rules, so we're forced to make up our own rules instead and then live by them. The word originally came from Samuel Maverick, who was an American pioneer and rancher who on purpose did not brand his cattle because everyone else around him branded. So he figured, why should I go through the trouble and the trauma of doing that to the cattle and the expense, obviously, when everyone else around him is doing that. And then when we talk about maverick planets, what we're really talking about is when a planet is conjunct an angle. What that does is it sets up sort of a new archetypal rules of engagement. It makes a person a hyper-expressive example of that planet, as well as how it's flavored through the sign. In a sense, if you've ever thought of like orphan planets, which are also known as feral or singletons, you know, planets that don't make aspects to other planets, this is another way to see and understand, you know, kind of how these energies work. Let me see, not a little, there we go, okay. Let's see, and then a friend of mine, which I really love, he said, it's like nailing the planets to a cross. So really, it makes them very hyper-evident, makes them very strong in the way that they're seen. Oh, this is gonna drive me crazy with this thing here. Let me see if I can do this. So, the angles are also known as the four faces of the self. We have the ascendant, starting here at the rising sign, the bottom of the chart, known also as the Imam-Cheli, the descendant, and of course the midheaven. The ascendant is the birth moment, of course. It's the face of and for ourselves. I like to think of the ascendant as being that place. It's kind of like our operating system. If you think of, I like to think of the greenhouse effect, where if we're inside of a green glass building, everything that we look out and see looks green, and everyone looking into us is going to be seeing green. And the IC, in a sense, is how we see our family, how we see ourselves, that face of how we are, who we are at home when we're by ourselves. It's kind of like our inner family, our inner self. The descendant, of course, is that relationship or that way that we have our face for others. And the midheaven or the medium-Cheli, which is the high point of the chart at the moment of birth, is the face of and for the public. Excuse me, drink water. And I like to think of the crosses as our key relationships in life. I mean, if we think of the ascendant as the way we relate to ourselves, the way we like to present ourselves to the world in a sense, the way we are with our IC, who we are at home when we're by ourselves, when we're with our intimate friends and family. The face of and for the other, the descendant, is how we see other and how the other perceives us, especially in relationship, but also in business dealings, of course, and working with people in other ways. And then the MC, of course, is that way, you know, kind of like our path in life, our career. It can clearly relate to work, but it's more kind of like our calling in life is kind of like how I like to see it. And a real important part that keeps coming up here is the houses do not define the angles. I'm not going to be talking about houses really at any point during this talk or really at any point in the book. It's really mainly talking about these 4 angles and how they place. The angles, while the angles don't define, the houses don't define the angles of the chart usually define the houses. As we know, in many house systems, the ascendant is the beginning point of the first house. The IC is the beginning of the 4th house cusp, and so on. I do whole sign houses, so how I look at it, the angles is these are sensitive points within a house. And the real important thing to realize is that regardless of the house system, the angles do not change. So this can be used regardless of what house system you use. And that's what's really nice about this, because none of us have to argue about which house system is the right one to use. So what makes a planet on the angle so special? The influences of the angles is similar to that of the cardinal signs, those signs being Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. They are concerned with making manifest and concrete, with bringing out into the open, unveiling and manifesting whatever may be latent in the personality and everything that is denoted by the signs and the planets connected with the angles. This is Alan Leo. It's very interesting. There's not a lot written about planets on the angles, and yet many of us are very much aware of the importance of how they place. So it's very exciting to do this work and do the research that was needed to see what kind of a prominence planets in the angle play, not only in an individual's life, but then how those individuals make a change, may influence the rest of us here on the planet. So I started looking a little bit, started working with Michel Gauguin's work. He came up with what are known as the Gauguin sectors. And incidentally, he was a scientist coming back from a science background who was not interested in, he wanted to disprove astrology, actually. He was not into, he wanted to say that it was really kind of just bogus and nothing could be found of it. But unfortunately, fortunately for us, unfortunately for him, the very interesting part is that he was able to find these, what are called the Gauguin sectors, which are these 10 degrees on either side of the angles, especially the ascendant and the midheaven is what he did. But as you can see, there's an effect with each of the angles. He was the first person to start looking at this and was able to say, hey, there's something statistically going on here, which is, of course, what gets scientists very excited when they can prove something has a statistical significance. For those of you who have psychology backgrounds or science backgrounds. What was I going to say? Oh, it doesn't look like, that's weird. He's also known for coming up with the Mars effect. And what they found is, and you can see here, what they found is when Mars was rising, meaning Mars was above the ascendant, between the ascendant and say like around here in the 9th house, because this of course is going to be a wheel that they're not showing here. What they found is that when Mars was around the ascendant to the midheaven a little bit beyond, that there was a preponderance of athletes who had this sort of a placement. As many of you know who have been in astrology for a long time, there are many ways in which certain characteristics show up in different things. I've seen like Chiron in the 5th house is very common in actors. Another friend of mine has seen that when there's a Mercury-Neptune square, that these people are also very good at selling things, creating things. Like our president has a Mercury and Neptune square. And here's Michel Gauguin's chart. As you can see here, we've got we're seeing unstable. Are you guys hearing me okay? Because I can turn off the video if there's an issue.
Yeah, it's fine so far.
Okay, good. Just came out with a little notice, so I just want to make sure. So with Michel Gauguin's chart, Aries rising 15 degrees. You can see this is just a sensitive point within the 1st house. With whole sign houses, there's no differentiation between the sign and the house. They're one and the same. And what we see in his chart is a 3-degree Jupiter in Taurus retrograde, 3 degrees, well, actually a little over 2 degrees away from his midheaven. And he has a secondary maverick planet, which is Mercury in Scorpio on his IC, 3 degrees away. And what did his wife have to say about him? She called him something of a medieval tyrant and not easy to live with. I mean, that wouldn't be, I mean, you can imagine what a Jupiter-Mercury opposition would be from Taurus to Scorpio anyway, but that would be quite a request placement. And I also think, with that Mercury down on his IC gave him that wonderful ability to do the research and dig deep and to find out what the truths were. I think he really had to question himself as far as what he wanted to do in life. As an aside, we were talking about Erin Sullivan earlier, and I know she was on today. She was working on Michel's last book when he died. So Erin's an amazing resource of understanding about Michel Gauguin also, and was one of the people who actually put me on the path of looking at this and looking at the preponderance of powerfulness that shows up when we put a planet on the angle. So again, what happens when a planet is found on the angle? We have an apparent augmented sense of self. I say apparent because people who have planets on the angle, as we're going to see going on, and for those of you here, I'm sure those of you who are listening probably have planets on the angles, otherwise you wouldn't be here. We can't help but be that way. I have Mars on my midheaven, which we'll show in a second, and I can't help but be that Martian individual. And it can appear as arrogant to other people. It can appear that I'm full of myself, but it's just that I'm really energetically ready and available to be of service at any moment, and I don't have any problem doing what I need to do it. And sometimes, of course, that can be off-putting to people. The important thing to realize with these planets is it's not easy to have these angular planets. They have an amount of strength about them that is, I think, especially when we're younger, is not something that's very easily understood. And so it's one of those things that helps us as we grow into it and become. But the nice thing that I find about it is it really propels us in a way into being more of ourselves. So there's an authenticity, I think, about these energies. They are supercharged archetypal planetary expressions clothed in the sign. I like Richard Tarnas calls it multivalent. And so we can see these multivalent ways in which the energies play through and exhibit themselves in the individuals. It gives the native an edge that is readily felt and seen by others, but not usually by the native him or herself. Part of the awareness that I gained in doing this process was to find how strong my Mars quality is in myself and in my chart. I don't have any fire in my chart, believe it or not, but that Mars on conjunct my midheaven has really gives me quite a strong fiery message of fiery strength and presence. Of course, I'm Sag rising, so I think that helps a bit of it also. But I never thought of myself as being a pushy person. I never thought of myself as being someone who is as persistent as I am, because I'm just being myself. And I'd say that's one of the things I hear from a lot of other Mavericks is that just being ourselves. People with Uranus on the angles, that can create quite an amount of change, quite an acceptance of oddities, an acceptance of things happening, flashes of things happening in the moment. And over time, as the system calms down and it becomes more familiar with it, as the body does get more used to it, it becomes an easier process for the individual. And I think the real key here is about building these relationships. And as many of us say in astrology, it's really important to work with the planets consciously than to have them work us unconsciously. And as this number 3 says, I think that's a key thing. I like to say that we don't know who discovered water, but it probably wasn't fish. I think of Pisces when I think of that. And I think it's really true when it comes to these planets on the angle too. These we aren't usually ones for being self-aware and that sort of a thing. So it really takes a little bit of an effort. Looks like we have a question. Ta-da. What orb am I working with? So in the book, most of the orbs are around 10 degrees. I have found that I've actually found some very interesting things. One is that even if the orbs are wide, I find that they still play. I find that even planets in the same sign as your angles have this resonance with them. I believe that the stronger that planet, well, first of all, it's really important to realize that the angles are stationary and remain static for your life. They will, of course, change by progression, but the angles that you're born with are your angles. So any planets that have a lower number than your angles, and say maybe like within 5 to 10 degrees, less number applying, meaning that it's moving towards your angle as it moves, those are going to be a little more powerful. But I have to say that I have also seen when people have it 3 and 5 degrees after the angle, there's still relevance, there's still strength in it. So great question, Carolyn, and thank you. I think this is one of those areas that hasn't really been studied very much. And I think as we get into it more, it's going to be really nice to really kind of pull out, what these planets really mean when they're in these placements, on these angular placements.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. And one of the other interesting things I've found is that people with planets on an angle also flock together, meaning that because these energies are so strong, because they are so hyper-realized, I don't think they're very easy for a lot of people to handle. And so I think those of us who have planets on the angles get along a little better and easier with other people with planets on the angles, because we're not intimidated. We're not I guess intimidated would be the right way to say it, or we're not scared or we're not feeling like we're going to be overwhelmed, or taken over by them. And as in everything with astrology, it's really important to understand that placements, meaning these placements next to the angles, do not give consciousness. One of the exciting things I found in this book was there is a very wide range of conscious versus unconscious expressions, even in the same signs. And it's been very interesting to see that. And so I think in that sense, when we find others who do have these placements, I think, especially as children, finding ways to have more compassion and finding ways to support them so that they can use their energies for the highest good, rather than using that energy in a way to make harm with other people. And how many people in the population, how many people allow that force within themselves or learn to channel it productively? My sense is there's anywhere from around 40 to 60% of the population will likely have a planet or a point on the angle. My book did not get into the nodes. It did not get into any of the other points. It was simply, especially with this first book, it's only the classical planets, meaning the Sun through Saturn. It took me 4 years to get to this point. I next am going to work on Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I hope it doesn't take me as long. But I think, for those of you who have asteroids next to your angles, conjunct your angles, those are going to have a strong placement. It'd be interesting to hear how people who have, say, their nodes next to an angle, how that plays out. This is just a whole wide range of research and question asking. So I welcome anyone to please feel free to email me at michael@coremichael.com and share what your experiences are with your planets or people you've worked with who have them. So this is a really, I think this is another one of those activation things that many of us have within us. And it'd be nice to activate this in a way that can really help create some change like the planet needs right now. Really needs. So I've kind of hinted this a little bit. This is top of my chart. I have a stationing Mars after my angle. My angle's at 27 degrees, 27 minutes of Virgo, and my Mars is stationing at half a degree after that at 28 degrees direct. 28 degrees exact. This was hard energy for me growing up. I don't think my parents and my family really understood how to work with this. I was told, I was labeled as ADHD, hyperactive. I was on Ritalin. I was shamed for being that way. I felt I was just being a kid, to be honest. remember, watching Sesame Street when it first came out and getting up, when the show ended, and I would just run around the room and expel all that energy from sitting still for so long. And that was considered a little bit too much. So, but as I've grown older, one of these things is it's, that Mars energy has gotten me into some very interesting positions. It's also helped me do the work that I do with astrology, with accounting, with I've been the CFO for a homeless shelter here in Santa Fe, New Mexico for the last 15 years. I'm very service driven. It's really important for me to make sure that that things are being taken care of, that people are being taken care of, and I really feel that Mars is a crucial energy in my life. And when I meet other Martians who have Mars on their angles, there's a sort of indefatigable energy that goes on. It can just keep going, and I think for the individual, that can be challenging if it's not raised in the right way. It's an important thing to understand that a lot of what we perceive as mental illnesses and there's such, things like that are really society driven. Our society decides what is acceptable behavior versus what is unacceptable behavior. And in this day and age where we are all being offered pills for fixing all of our many maladies, it's really important, I think, to look at what our chart is saying, what our original intention of incarnating in this lifetime is about, and try and work with these energies in a way that is really more helpful rather than taking something that prevents us from being our true selves. So I think these energies are not easy for children to express. I think it's not easy for even adults to express. And so being able to become aware of how this Martian energy is and be able to have friends around me who were able to tell me, hey, you're being a little bit too much, or hey, can you calm down a little bit, or settle back, is really good. And so I encourage you to share, your maverick self with your friends, explaining, that that's what part of the thing is, and maybe ask input, for, how is that energy received by your friends? These are energies that really make our lives work. I mean, they're like little, especially like with Mars and some of the other planets, they're like little batteries or energy stores. And if we can use them for what they're supposed to be used for, I think we can get a lot more out of them. And when we're not using them for their highest good, I think we can become depressed, and we can have a lot of other issues that can come up. Some more water, excuse me. I love this. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes. Sound familiar to you guys? The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. But the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They invent, they imagine, they heal, they explore, they create, they inspire, they push the human race forward. Maybe they have to be crazy. While some see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So it's been attributed to a few different people. It's been attributed to Steve Jobs, who I actually really love to say has no planets on his angles. So that's a prime example of how you can make a difference in the world without having a maverick planet. Rob Sultanen, John McAfee, and dear Tracy Stranger from Australia has a really great series on CDs on astrology, attributes this to Einstein. Someone told me at the conference what it was and who it was who really said it, and I didn't write it down. So if anyone out there does, if you can email me or tell me, I would really love to hear it. But I just think it's a great line. It also obviously very much fits for many of us astrologers. But you can see that there's something that's required in that in order to change things, in order to say the status quo isn't working, there has to be an ability to stand up to that which is different. And what I believe with these planets and the angles, we can't help but be that. It's kind of like the theme I keep saying is like, can't help but be that. Now we're going to get into some of the examples, which makes it fun. Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, Uranus, Pluto, in Virgo conjunct his ascendant, and Chiron, Saturn in Pisces on his descendant, my generation, mid-60s, committed suicide, very deep feeling, very deep sensing individual, as you can see from those energies. He left an impact. He left a mark on the planet. Then we have Bend It Like Beckham, David Beckham, who is known for having a type of special kick that he makes. It actually bends, it curves around. He's got his moon in Capricorn on the IC, and how's this for an athlete? Mercury and Taurus on the ascendant. I mean, he's very sexy. He's a model. He promotes clothing lines, clothes, perfumes, jewelry, any number of things. Very, very nice example of that Mercury and Moon working, even though they're squaring one another, working really well together. And beautiful Liv Tyler, Steven Tyler's daughter from Aerosmith. She was beautiful in the Lord of the Rings series. She has Sun, Mercury conjunct her Cancer ascendant, as well as Moon in Capricorn on her descendant. Kind of an interesting shift around from the energies that Beckham has, but you can see that, there's still that very, that Capricorn moon is very magnetic and has a sense of groundedness that is really helpful with their Taurus and Cancer energies. Jean Dixon, the famous astrologer from the 50s and 60s, Moon in Leo on the IC, of course. She was really great at promoting herself. And she has Saturn, Mars conjunct her midheaven in Aquarius. She was a phenomenal, she was a decent astrologer who made some, a few good predictions that she promoted very heavily. And so, I think that moon in Leo really helped her out a lot. Prince William, Sun and Moon in Cancer on the descendant. He told his brother Harry when he was a child that he wanted to become a police officer so that he could keep his family safe. And as I wrote in the book, I think it's very bittersweet when you think that, I'm sure that he really wished he could have been a police officer at the time when his mother died in the car accident. Because in the end, you won't remember the time you spent working in the office or mowing your lawn. Climb that damn mountain, Jack Kerouac. Live, travel, adventure, bless, and don't be sorry. What does that sound like? Mars in Sagittarius on the IC. Talk about wanderlust. I don't think he would have been able to keep him down. It wasn't, he wasn't made for that that button down. He wasn't. Let's see what's the right way to say it. From his generation, he wasn't going to go into that, the white picket fence sort of a lifestyle. He needed to be out journeying on his own and living his life. Practice kindness all day to everybody, and you will realize you're already in heaven now. Beautiful. Very Sagittarian. Let's see. Joan Quigley was Nancy Reagan's astrologer. She had Mercury conjunct her descendant in Pisces. She communicated with the planets, one and all, using her intuition and communicating them to Nancy Reagan. Really came in handy there. I like to, whenever I see Mercury in Pisces, I just often think of people who are just almost an uncanny ability to communicate, to pull things out of almost nowhere. And so when it's on the descendant, one of the angles, it's just that liminal quality, especially when you're talking about the descendant and the ascendant. It's really important to remember with the ascendant, we're talking about the birth moment, that part we come from where we are connected with our mother and all that is, and we're born and we take that first breath where we step forward and into our sense of individuation. So these are, the ascendant and descendant are very liminal. So there's an easier way of kind of pulling forth the information from those places. I love this one. I almost fell out of my chair when I saw this. For those of you who are old enough to know who this is, You can't touch this because you can't catch it. Sun in Aries on the midheaven. What is his name? MC Hammer. I mean, it's kind of funny when you see it like just play out even in the name of the person, and it's just some of the amazing ways in which this comes up. I mean, you really, literally, you can't make this up. And they're just what I did is I went through and I pulled anecdotes, people's names, the roles they've played as actors, or songs they've sung as singers. And it's just uncanny how these archetypes just play out over and over and over again. Here's part of my second theory, birds of a feather. We have Marilyn Monroe wearing that beautiful dress she was literally sewn into, because there was no way she could have pulled it over her body to get it on. But this is the dress she wore for singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President. So she has planets in the angles. John F. Kennedy has planets on the angles. And Jacqueline Kennedy has planets on the angles. And Bobby Kennedy has planets on the angles. So you can see that, these people were all powerhouses back in the day. I mean, there wasn't anyone in the 1960s who didn't know who these four individuals were. As an example of what I mean by mavericks and making a change on the world. Another uncanny one, Charles Manson and the Manson family. There he is. I think he's really passed away, but there he is with Jupiter, Mercury, and Scorpio on his descendant. Pluto conjunct his Cancer IC. So you can see that watery, very Rasputin. I mean, you look at that picture, it's very interesting character. I often think of that Mercury and Scorpio as being, someone who's can easily manipulate others. And then look at the matches over here. So we have two of them with Chiron and Scorpio. So he's going to fit right in there. He's going to tell them exactly what they want to hear, Susan and Patricia. And then for Leslie Van Houten, Saturn in Virgo on the ascendant. So we can see just kind of how when one comes with that level of force, how you can make changes, how you can influence other people. There's some really phenomenal shows on I was going to say Facebook, Netflix. Mind Hunters is one of them. Really well done. It's the beginning of the FBI's psychological profiling system. Because when you think about it, back in the 70s, when a lot of this was going on, this is when there was just this we kind of had that very kind of quiet 1950s. We didn't think anything bad was happening. But meanwhile, there were these individuals around the country who were doing some very scary things. And the surprising thing is not even just in the U.S., but obviously in Europe and in Australia. And the book really highlights how many of those serial killers are actually people who have maverick planets. So it's very important to realize that these are forces that are needing to be expressed. And if we can find ways to maybe make people feel included, what a big difference it'll be. So same placement, opposite expression. This came up a lot. These are the things that excite me. Here on the right is Richard Carpenter from the singing group The Carpenters. And on the left, Ted Bundy. Richard's songs include I Won't Last a Day Without You, Hurting Each Other, and Yesterday Once More. Ted Bundy, one of his quotes is, I'm the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet. We serial killers are your sons. We are your husbands. We are everywhere. And there will be more of your children dead tomorrow. I don't think anybody doubts whether I've done some bad things. The question is what, of course, and how, and maybe even most importantly, why. Probably wouldn't take too much to figure out what these what the signature is here. Richard has a stellium in Scorpio. We've got Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, and Mars all in Scorpio. I mean, these songs all sound so scorpionic. This is down in the IC, by the way. And Ted Bundy has Mercury retrograde and Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde, along with Jupiter down in his Scorpio, which actually really makes sense when you think that, probably his inner world, his inner communication, his inner understanding, especially I think of women, but that Venus retrograde was very tortured, was very problematic. And Michel Gauguin, of course, is in this category too. And because all three of these people have Mercury in Scorpio on the IC. So three very different ways about using those energies and how they're expressed. And as an example, for others who have Jupiter and Scorpio on the IC, Sir Elton John, Richard Carpenter again, of course, Ted Bundy, and O.J. Simpson. So very interesting. You can kind of see like how that Scorpio tendency, especially on the IC, because it's so internal, it's so private, that there can be some really tortured things that are developed from that space. I love this one because this one is to me a really prime example of what maybe could have been different. Both of these men had defined ideas about the other. Both men redefined what relating to other meant, and both have affected countless millions of people. Sigmund Freud and Adolf Hitler. I mean, I wonder. I mean, as many people have throughout history since he was alive, since the last century, what might have happened had Hitler been accepted into art school, had been nurtured in his artistic and creative ability. Sun in Taurus on the descendant. These people need to be seen. A bull on the angle needs to be seen, needs to be heard, and I just wonder what could have happened had he been treated a little better. How many millions of people would not have had to die? How about these individuals? Do you think? Oh, this is one of the other examples I have. Is that with people who have planets in the angles, we know the rules, but we don't necessarily like to follow them. And this can get kind of extreme, as we're going to see with a few of these people. We don't pay taxes. Only the little people pay taxes. Leona Helmsley, she was one of the, she was a pre-Trump individual, actually. She and her husband owned a considerable amount of real estate in New York City. Anyone from New York would definitely know. She was known as the Queen of Mean, M-E-A-N, mean. You can tell by looking at her face, she wasn't a very happy person for how much she was bigger than the little people. Madonna, I mean, she's classic. The truth is, what's really interesting with her is she knew at a very young age she wanted to be famous, and she just was relentless about it. She just pushed and pushed and pushed until she did it. And I always pull a blank on him. But this is the gentleman who, back in the 1950s, really, brought up the scare. People who, the communists and gay people and artists. This is one of his lines that's so great. Beware of artists because they mix with all classes of society and therefore are the most dangerous. I purposely blank his name. Every time I do this talk, I blank his name. So we'll blank him. And this is just so breathtaking in a sense. Bruce Jenner, who we now know as Caitlyn Jenner, Sun in Scorpio on the ascendant. I don't know of a more amazing representation of transformation. If you think of the sun as being how we shine out, Scorpio as being the sign of transformation of one thing to the other, and it's on the ascendant, meaning that is how we see her and how she sees the world. You can see that Scorpio played that the sun in Scorpio played an amazing role for Caitlyn in her life. And Saturn and Gemini on the descendant, I never thought about this before. The holding and releasing of secrets. Julian Assange. Saturn and Gemini in the descendant. A real responsibility, right? A responsibility for letting people know the truth and saying it in the appropriate way, of course, because it's Saturn and it's in Gemini. And here we have an example of higher conscious and lower conscious expressions. We have Sri Aurobindo, who is known for his insouled matter, which is very similar to the teachings of Alice Bailey in the esoteric work. He states the real difficulty is always in ourselves, not in our surroundings. Excuse me. And then we have Bernard Carrick, the disgraced ex-NYPD commissioner. He was a commissioner, a New York police commissioner during 9/11, and was found to be taking advantage of his situation while other people were just simply trying to survive the 9/11 experience, which just happened just the other day as an anniversary. They both have Jupiter in Leo on the ascendant. You can see how people would really, that's very kingly position. It's very strong. Taking law into one's own hands. I mean, that's, here we are as a police officer, and I'm sure Arvindo, who took higher or divine law and expressed that from a place of love, because Leo on its highest aspect is the expression of love. And does a maverick have the power to change the world? Some of you may recognize this chart. I actually started doing this work on this before he was president, started looking at this, and he was just such a prime example of what this means. It can be a very toddler-like energy. I mean, if it's not fully integrated, it can. I mean, this is how it can be really feral. He's whether you like him or not, people have to pay attention to him for one reason or another. How are we doing on time? Okay, 7:58. Good. And it was funny the other day. I was looking at this. When we have dinner parties, have a bunch of people over and having something to drink. We do these little marker things on glasses so that people know that's theirs. And for some reason, I'm always against it. I always feel kind of like I'm marked. It's kind of a funny thing. I don't like it that way. But then I was thinking, because I have a tattoo. This is on my arm, Labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. And I'm branded by that. So it's a very interesting thing to see how we choose, how we define, how we decide that we want to be marked or how we don't want to be marked in life. So this is a time when I enjoy a little bit more interaction. If anyone feels like, sharing or anything, I'm just asking if people have any planets in the angles and if you're aware of them, if you have more than one.
Yes, I have 3 planets on 2 angles.
Wow.
And my sun is close to a 3rd angle, but it's in the 3rd house, not the 4th. So that's a question. What about a planet that's in the preceding house, but close to that angle? Would you consider it angular?
So is it the same sign as your angle?
No.
No. So for the book, actually, I only did where the angles and the planet are in the same sign. But I have to tell you that when I was doing it, I was able to see that there were people like you who have planets outside of that sign that are close enough to the angle and still having a similar kind of experience. So, how I always look at it when it comes to astrology is how does each person experience it? I mean, you, Linda, you are a maverick. Look what you do with the EA Zoom, what you're able to do in a few years of creating this amazing platform to provide these free services for people, and the volunteers you've gotten together to help do this. I mean, if that isn't maverick ability, I don't know what is.
So that's what it is. Okay.
Have you been aware of how those planets have operated or affected other people in your life, or is it something?
Yes, super aware. Neptune on the ascendant, of course. It was very hard earlier in life. And then Uranus right on that midheaven. Yeah, and then Pluto angular as well, but it's further away. It's not conjunct the midheaven.
I
And
love that. Uranus in the midheaven is such a mark. I'm so excited to be working on Uranus next because I know there's just gonna be so many astrologers with that mark. You know, Armin Diaz also has his Uranus on the angle on the midheaven. So I really think those of you like that. I mean, you're really here to help usher in astrology on such a primal level. So
yeah,
thank you.
I'd like to say that it was really hard for most of my life having these placements, but you do get rewards later in life. If a planet's on the midheaven, you know, in the 10th house, later in life, it tends to come to life. And I'm very happy with my angular planets now, but I wasn't before. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a beautiful way to put
Thanks,
it.
Michael.
Anyone else?
Uranus and Pluto for me.
I'm sorry, Wanda?
Uranus and both Uranus and Pluto.
Which
I'm of
angle?
the same generation as you, the Uranus conjunct Pluto.
Ooh, so you got that plus on it. Which angle do you have it on?
The ascendant.
Wow, so like Kurt Cobain then.
Yes.
Wow.
His is closer than mine.
Yeah, nice. And how are you? I mean, that's got to be a pretty powerful energy for a woman to wear. How do people respond to you?
Uh, I have been told by a few of my friends when they first met me, they thought I was mean as hell.
Mm,
But once people get to know me, they don't see that.
definitely.
But it has been a difficult energy as far as childhood and in my family. I am definitely the black sheep of the family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the other thing I like to say with those ascendant planets is and Linda has her Neptune there. If your moms are around, it'd be interesting to like find out if anything went on around your birth, because that's a very especially with Pluto and Uranus, right? Is it in your first house or is it back in your 12th?
First.
First, okay.
Yeah, 7 degrees away from the ascendant.
Yeah. So I mean, the hard part with that too is I don't know. There's something really powerful too about Pluto, I find, and for Plutonic individuals, especially when they're on the angles, is that we radiate this energy that people like sense, but they don't know what to do with it. And I think until we learn how to deal with it and own our power, and of course, hello Pluto, it can be taken advantage of very easily.
Yes, because they're both retrograde. So it hasn't been until I think I was always aware of it, because when I finally got my chart done and saw that on the angle, even though I had no clue what the heck Pluto and Uranus were, but I immediately knew, like, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's so wonderful because then at least you can have some compassion, because to be honest, how I look at it is like, dang, you have one powerful soul that came in. It was like, it's ready to do some business.
Yeah. And it seems like every time when I tried to say, kind of stay back, and it's something always nudges, something's always happening.
Exactly. And for those of you who do have planets on the angle, are you aware that you have friends and family members who also do?
I am. My millennial daughter, she's going through her first Saturn return, has Neptune and Uranus on her midheaven in Capricorn. Wow. And I got the information from you about the suicide links in Canada, and I sent it off to her because she's working up north, and she's working with a population that's in danger. And she was about to put that information into a young teenager's cell phone because Sarah will be leaving in November, and Bree needs it anyway. But she's Uranus on her midheaven is certainly causing her to change places every 8 months. She ups and leaves whatever province she's in and goes, and she's a journalist somewhere else. So it's and she can only do, with the Neptune, she can only do what is her passion. Like, she'll occasionally, apologize to me because she could be making big money. And as a journalist, she's certainly not. And it's like she can't do otherwise, and I wouldn't want her to. But
well, the good news is she's got you for a mom, and I mean, seriously, I mean, you have the understanding that this plane isn't just about making money, and I mean, and especially with that, I mean, my partner is that generation with that Uranus Neptune conjunction, but I can't imagine it conjunct the midheaven. I mean, that's really powerful, and for someone, I have a 10. If you do it by the houses, I've got a 10th house Uranus Pluto combo, and an astrologer told me something once. I'm going to pass it on to you to give to your daughter. Is the key is to remain in a position long enough that the changes you make, you can also benefit from them.
Oh, yeah.
Because I used to do that a lot, and then when he told me that, it's like I've actually, because with that Uranus energy on the midheaven, and Linda can probably talk to this, I mean, it's this amazing ability to go in and take chaos and create, the ability to create order with Neptune there too. It's that amazing sensibility. And journalism, I would think also she may even consider doing photography or something. That would be really...
Well, because she's worked for small newspapers that don't have big budgets, she took a photography course online, and she's taken some brilliant pictures. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great, I mean, it's, to be honest, I mean, with that pairing, I mean, the sky is literally the limit. I mean, Uranus and Neptune together, that's perfect. And what planets again do you have, Carol? I mean, I know I've got your chart, but what do you...
I've got, that's what I was asking you about, the orbs. I've got my descendant, 28 Libra, but Mercury is 3 degrees Scorpio.
So yeah, I would say I didn't cover that type of a placement, but I mean, that's within 5 degrees. I would definitely say that, it's going to be placed, and it works for you, right?
Yeah, I'm just discovering what works for me. I have Neptune conjunct my sun and some other stuff, and I've been, I repressed a lot of stuff, I would say, until my container was strong enough to withstand it. It was actually, I think I've mentioned this to you too, it was Jason Hawley's Arcadian Myth that really blew things open, and I have a great psychiatrist, so that worked well. But certainly in my 7th decade, life is much easier.
Yeah, good.
Much. Yeah.
Well, we just have a few more minutes. I just want to kind of say a couple of things that I think that the book is really good for. One is to, most books in astrology are basically the planet going through the 12 signs, and they use the signs as kind of a variant for the houses. The nice thing with this book is it covers 48 expressions for each planet. So it's the sun going through each of the signs on each of the angles. So it gives kind of a really nice full-bodied sense of what the archetypal ranges are going to be. It can help you understand your own angular planets. If you're kind of having a little bit of a question of what it might be like, you can easily look up the placement and see what other people have done with it. What I find within myself and with other people when they look these up is that we all kind of have a little bit of a resonance with these other people who have these similar kind of placements in their charts. So you're probably already maybe aware of these individuals. I think it's really great to see how people work with these energies. Sometimes they pull through things that might help guide us a little bit to what we need to do to make it as our next step. And I think it's really good for gaining further insight in, like I said earlier, planets that are in the same sign as your angles, regardless of what the orb is. You're still going to see that relevance playing out. And finally, it's really important to understand that, whether a person has planets on the angle or not, everyone is going to experience transits and progressions to their angles. So every month you're going to experience 4 transits of the moon to your angles. Every year you're going to experience 4 transits of your sun to the angles. Over the course of your lifetime, you're going to have many different types of transits and progressions. So everyone gets to experience these energies as they go through and live life. All right, we have about 4 minutes left. I'm available for any other questions. I hope I didn't talk too much. Or maybe not.
I had a question.
Sure.
What if one of the, or if the planets that you have on the angles change direction by progression?
It's a really great point. And I mean, actually, it works out perfectly because mine kind of fits in that with my stationing Mars. My Mars will not actually go direct. By progression, it went retrograde when I was 3 days old, and I mean by transit. And it will not go direct until I'm 84. So I'm hoping that I live at least to like 90 because I'd like to experience like what it feels like it. But in this sense, I think you're kind of touching on something that even gets, more concentrated, especially when that planet starts moving forward. And then when that planet gets to that point where it was at the birth moment, and then when that planet again moves on by progression and then hits that angle. I think those would be key points of where you would see some activity going on with them.
That happened with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, my Mercury is stationary retrograde conjunct the IC, and so it went retrograde, back across it when I was really young, but then eventually came back across.
And did you feel kind of like, or when you look back, were there some specific issues or things that happened that you remember?
I looked at it with the eye toward what happened when it turned direct, and
right.
that was monumental.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, and also, and I'm not sure exactly when it went back over the IC.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems like, for me, it seems like when the planet by progression gets to that point back up to where it was at the birth moment, it seems to me like there's some sort of a rebirth that occurs. There's like a recalibration. Because when you think about it, especially for those of us who have these retrograde planets when you were young and then they go direct, early on in their lifetime, the retrograde that usually occurs it means some sort of a life review that's occurring. But I mean, when we're young, what kind of a life review could be really happening? So it's this interesting thing that I think of these holding back of energies, of these ways that we have to be more responsible in the ways these energies work so that we can move forward with them. Almost like we step back into those old signs with a bag and we bring more tools and as we move forward, we have it to go forward or something like that. It's kind of the sense that I get with those.
Yeah, and actually, in thinking about it, I think it coincided with my Uranus opposition.
Wow, bless you. Lucky you. Wow.
Yeah.
That might be a heck of a coming out party.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A lot of education. Well, I want to thank everyone tonight. I think that is up. And thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me with your experiences with your planets and the angles. You can reach me at coremichael.com, michael@coremichael.com, or my website is coremichael.com. I want to thank Linda and Wanda for your wonderful help today, and Carolyn and Sue, thank you for joining us, and have a great night. Take care.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you to Wanda and all the admins and all our audiences. And would you all please thank Michael Bartlett, everyone?
Thank you, Michael. That was excellent as always.
Yes, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael. Great.